Brigadier General retired J. Roy Robinson. He's a retired Mississippi Army National Guardsman who understands what we do better than most. During his 33-year career, he served as a traditional guardsman, a state employee, a federal technician, and his active guard reserve. That certainly gives him a firsthand perspective on what we do when he and his team fight for us on Capitol Hill. We are honored again this year to have the Chief Executive Officer, as we know him, the President of our National Guard Association, offer a few words on behalf of our organization as a whole. Brigadier General Robinson.
I tell you, that's really good, because I normally try to keep my comments down to around 8 to 10 minutes. But since we're ahead of schedule, I'm going to go ahead and give y'all a full dose. And by the way, there's no way that they would have let me in the Air Guard when I got into the National Guard in Mississippi in 1983. I just didn't have the background, if you understand what I'm saying. The test and everything that you had to do to get into the Air Guard, they looked at me, they said, you're an Army guy. You're going to do really well in the Army. No, I tell you, I go all over the country, and I visit these conferences, and I have to tell you, it always makes a huge impact on me when I see the leadership of the state sitting on the front row at the National Guard Association conference for that state. And I know in Georgia it's the norm. Y'all are used to it. It was that way in Mississippi, and it's that way in some other states, but it's not that way everywhere. And I just want to tell your leadership, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the association. It's hugely important on what we do. I got a call from Joe Hokinson. Thank you for being here. I love being able to get in front of you, because I can give you all the problems right here one-on-one. I got a call from Joe Girard. I guess it was Thursday when I got here. You know General Girard, good guy, love him to death, been going back and forth for a long time, and he called me and he said, the quality of the program this weekend is probably going to go down a little bit because I'm not there anymore. So, of course, you can imagine what my response was. I go back to the Army versus the air thing. You can imagine my response. But I sent him some notes on Saturday. I said, man, I don't know what you did, but these guys seem glad that you got the hell out of here. This is the best conference I've been to. How many technicians do we have? So let me tell you where we are on TRICARE Reserve Select for technicians. We're working it. We've been working it hard for 3 years. We had it done 2 years ago. I wish I could tell you this morning that we're going to get it done this year. I can tell you this. There's no other issue that we put more effort behind this year than getting TRICARE Reserve Select for technicians. It's the right thing to do. They wear the same uniform. They stand in the same formations. The limitations that have been put on them to participate in the Federal Employee Health Benefits Program is actually for the good of the FEHB, not for the good of the individual member. And I got to tell you, I don't know about y'all, but I know that the GS-9s and the GS-11s in most of the southern states that are working out there in those shops, the maintenance guys, the logistics guys, if we could save them about $250 to $350 a month on the health insurance, that's significant money where I come from. And I commit to you, we're going to continue to work that. I'm hopeful, though I'm not 100% convinced that we're going to get it done this year, but I can assure you it won't be because we're not making the effort that we need to be making. Corporate partners, thank y'all so much for what you do. I'm telling you, the contribution that our corporate partners give to us, both at the state and the national level, the things that their participation allows us to do for our members, I just can't say thank you enough or as many times as I would like to. But thank you for being here. Thank you for what you're doing for the state of Georgia, and thank you for what you're doing for NGAGA in Washington, D.C. So just to kind of give you a background, this is where we are in D.C. And I know that from out there, I watch the news too. When I'm outside of D.C., you just scratch your head, and it seems like absolute and total chaos. But they actually do have some things that they do based on certain schedules, and occasionally they do get a budget passed, and there are some good things in there for the Department of Defense. Kind of where we are, the Senate Armed Services Committee basically has completed their work on the National Defense Authorization Bill. The House Appropriations Committee for Defense has got their work done. The HASC, hopefully next week, we'll see the mark. We'll start to get some feedback on what we have in that legislation that's going to affect the Army and Air National Guard. And the SACD, we're still kind of waiting to hear. They're not as far along in the process as they should be or custom or historically have been. This year they've kind of flipped it. You know, normally you get the House doing their business and then you get the Senate doing their business, and they have absolutely reversed course. But I'm optimistic about what we're getting. I think you're going to continue to see some good things come out of the legislation for the National Guard. I have to say, people need to understand. You know, there's a lot of talk about the budget caps when they were put in effect. There's still a conversation going on about the budget caps. As members of the National Guard wearing the uniform, I just need to make sure that you understand. If the Congress does not lift the budget caps, everything's off. All the things, all the programs that we work for, all of the strides that we made in terms of growing the budget and addressing some of the needs, if Congress does not find a way to raise the budget caps, it will dramatically affect the funding of the National Guard and the Department of Defense. Just to kind of put that into perspective, the budget caps that went into effect in, 17? They limited the expenditures to $576 billion. So I refer back to the Army versus the air thing. I don't do math in public. It just seems to be a good thing that I shouldn't do when I'm up in front of crowds. But I want to put this in perspective. I want you to count it. In 2017, the budget was about $587 billion. 2018, the budget jumped to $700 billion. 2019, the budget jumped to $716 billion. If you talk to all the experts and the people who know, and you look at some of the legislation that's already come off the Hill, 2020 is going to be around $733 billion. You know, I don't know about y'all, but those numbers are with a B. That's a lot of money. We sometimes, as a National Guard, are a little bit bashful about making sure that the services in our Congress understand what our requirements are. And the only thing I'll convey to the leadership and to every member sitting here in uniform, this is not the time to be bashful. This is not the time to back away from conversations without asking for the real deal on what we need as a National Guard. I have these conversations with some of the senior leaders on the Army and Air all the time. I've had some pretty direct conversations. And I'm asking on your behalf for concurrent and proportional fielding of equipment, where when you deploy with formations, be it Army or Air, that you look just like your active counterparts. It doesn't matter what component you're from. You're fighting the same fights. You're doing the same thing. We should look alike. There shouldn't be a difference in technology between the components. I occasionally get a little bit of pushback from some of the most senior leadership inside the Army and Air Force. Frankly, a lot of it comes from the Army. Some of the discussions that I've had, you know, they say, hey, you know, we would love to do that. We would love to have all Apache E models in the Army National Guard. We would love to have M1A4 tanks and Army National Guard formations. But, you know, we just can't afford to do everything. And I always do it with a Southern smile. And I tell them, you know, sir, if you can't afford it today, you won't ever be able to afford it. This is not about money. This is about priorities. You know, it gets real quiet in the room because they're not used to anybody saying that kind of stuff back to them. But it's the truth. Don't buy it. Don't buy that line that they can't afford it. I don't care what their priorities are. I don't care what kind of modernization they're trying to take us to. I go back to, and I encourage you to do the same thing, go back to $733 billion appropriated by the Congress to run the Department of Defense. And when those members of Congress appropriate that kind of money, they don't segregate between components. When they appropriate that kind of money, they assume that the services are doing concurrent and proportional modernization and as far as between the components in terms of all the hardware that we have, all the airframes that we fly. And sometimes we need to have very strong, concise, straightforward communication with the services to make sure that they understand that the members of Congress intended for all the components to look alike when they go downrange. We don't need to stop that. And when I say this is not a time to be bashful, I mean it more than ever. Probably, I've been associated with the Guard for about 37 years. I don't know that I've ever seen a time when we actually are in a position to do the kind of things and upgrade with the changes that could possibly take place in the Air and Army National Guard. So there's some good news. We got F-35s going to Air National Guard ramps. My hat's off to them. We need to continue down that road. We need to make sure that we support that frame and that we are able to continue to add Air National Guard wings onto the growth of the F-35. We talked earlier, this C-130J issue, we got to bring it to a head. We have got to reinforce with the Air Force that it's time for the C-130Js to get more attention and to be a part of that $733 billion budget. Let me help you with that. I see a bunch of Air folks here. I don't know if you realize it or not, the Air Force has not bought a C-130J for the National Guard out of their base budget in 4 years. The Air National Guard only has about 25% of the required C-130Js in their structure today. That number was 18% last year. The only way that it's increased has been through congressional ads. That needs to stop. The Air Force needs to get on board. There's no way that we can fix the C-130 problem that we have throughout the country without some of those frames being bought out of the base budget. And we may have to push them a little bit and help them develop that program to make sure that those C-130Js are a part of the base budget as they come forward. KC-46 is a great story. They're about to get some of the issues worked out with the airframe. I really want to hear more discussion out of the department about KC-46s and National Guard ramps. We got KC-135s all over the country, most of which are older than some of the oldest people in this room, and I'm not going to point anybody out. But those are old airframes. There's going to come a time where either we're going to migrate to KC-46s or some of those KC-135s are going to cease to fly. And I think the discussion needs to start right now to make sure that we stay out front. Good news on Apaches. Apaches, obviously I'm not an aviator. I never dreamed that I would spend as much time in conversations about aviation as I have in the last 3 years. I know more about aircraft now than I ever thought possible. And again, I go back to that recruiter. He would be very surprised too. We've had some success. I think we're going to have a National Guard Apache Echo Model Battalion stood up in the National Guard by about 2021. Joe Hoganson will tell you, 2 years ago, that was looking like we might have a full-up battalion somewhere around 2025, and they may or may not be Echo models like the active component's going to have. My hat's off to them. The National Guard Bureau and the director of the Army National Guard has been heavily involved in that. But make no mistake about it. God bless them. God bless what they do. But if your association had not been involved in those discussions and continued to press back in a very robust manner, we would have never got those numbers down to where they are. Make no mistake about that. I'm appreciative of the efforts that we have combined, but the voice of your association was very strong in that, and I have to say, we got to continue that. I like where we're headed with Black Hawk Mike models. The legislation that we're seeing looks like it's going to be a good year. And to the Army's credit, they've actually allocated out of their base budget a very adequate number of Mike models coming into the National Guard to replace some of the older models that we've got in our formations. They actually upped the number as far as the number of Victors that we can put in our formations. They raised the money to where they can actually do the modifications on more. I think it was 5 additional that they add to the National Guard numbers. I'm very pleased with that. JLTVs are coming to the National Guard. I'm very pleased with that. I didn't think that was going to happen as quickly as it has. That's going to affect every combat formation throughout the National Guard, and it's going to turn into a really good thing. You're going to see them quicker than you think. I tell you where there's fixing to be some friction, and that's why I'm so glad that Joe Hokinson is sitting right here on the front corner seat. You know, these ground combat systems, we got heavy brigades. And I know Georgia's got a light brigade, and God bless what they're doing today. I can't say enough about what those guys are doing forward and taking on the fight. But when it comes to ground combat systems, there's no reason in the world that a National Guard heavy brigade should be in a tank that's 20 years older than an active duty heavy brigade when they're going to the same fight within the same time frame to fight the same enemy that we don't know where or when that's going to happen, that we have to be prepared for all the time. I got to say, I am disappointed in the leadership of the Army. You know, they're currently fielding 3 active duty brigades with the latest and greatest M1A4, or that's the plan. The downside of that is that they've decided that they're going to cascade those 3 brigade sets to the National Guard in the name of modernization. If you go and look at those tanks, they're only 1 generation above what we already have, and we're actually 2 generations behind in the National Guard. We got 2 brigades that are in fairly good shape. They got biceps. We have 3 brigades that are actually in tanks that are older than anything else in the inventory. I had an interesting conversation. Y'all will like this. We actually had a conversation. I was sitting in there with the Secretary of the Army and several of the adjutant generals. We had a great exchange. But one thing came up, and that was the age of the M1 tanks. And again, I go back to, I got the same deal where, hey, you know, we just can't afford to upgrade the Guard at the same time. We can't afford for technology to be the same. It's just too expensive. And they went and said, you know, what we really want to do is put the latest and greatest and the best technology in the hands of those who are first to fight. And I openly said in front of everybody, I got no issue with that. I want to put that in the first to fight as well. The issue I have is I don't think you can predict who's going to be the first to fight and where the fight's going to be and when it's going to happen. And I gave him a specific example. At that time, the brigade out of Tennessee was kind of forward deployed. They were, at that specific point in time when I was talking to the Secretary, they were the closest Army formation to Russia. They were literally the closest thing that the Army had of all the components to Russia. And my point to the Secretary was, well, if it happened today and it happened there, the people who were first to fight would not have the best technology. They would not have the best thing that they could have in terms of taking on the fight to the enemy. And that goes back to that very thing that I said. You can't predict who, you can't predict where, and you can't predict when. And it's very hard for me to allow them to tell me that they can't afford it. And that's just a prime example, and what will really make you think more than anything else, I truly believe that the Secretary didn't know that. He didn't know that. So all I'm saying is, We got to keep pushing that baton. We have got to ensure that the services, both the Army and the Air, continue to equip and modernize our formations at the same time that they modernize the formations of the other components. I think the ground combat systems are probably, over the last 2.5 years, we've talked a lot about aviation. We've talked about airframes. It's been a pretty intense fight over where we are and where we're going. I think you're going to see this next year that a lot of that conversation is going to shift to ground combat systems, because we've got some holes and we've got some woeful inadequacies that if we don't get addressed right now, when the budgets are ending $733 billion, we're going to have to live with them for a very long time. So you're going to hear a lot of conversation about it. So I won't dwell on it. I just think it's important that y'all understand where we are, how we interact with the services, and how we interact with the Congress on your behalf. So you heard a lot about duty status reform. It's been a hot topic. It appears that duty status reform is not going to happen this year. It looks like we're going to push that off for another year. It's going to allow a lot more study. There's some things that happened as duty status reform went through the process with OMB. A lot of the benefit parity issues that we thought were going to kind of come to fruition within the duty status reform itself, when it got to OMB, they stripped out a lot of those benefits because of the cost. So when we got the final document, it's not quite as refreshing on the benefit side as we thought it would be, not nearly as robust. So I think we're going to spend a lot of time over the next 12 months prior to next fall trying to work with the Army and the Department of Defense and OSD to make sure that duty status reform winds up looking like we need to look like. We want to have the Guard influence on it. I got to tell you, I'm pretty impressed with Marshall putting that membership slide up there. I love it. I love to see some of y'all squirm and all the swiveling that goes on when he puts it up there. And I agree. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I think members of the choir are going to have to be recruiters. Before I went up to Naugus, I was the executive director in Mississippi. I served in uniform for a long time. I was just like each of you. I was a state employee. I was a technician trying to figure out how to keep the health care bills paid. I was a AGR guy for a long time. I sat in all these meetings just like y'all are doing right now, wishing that guy would sit down and be quiet so I could get another cup of coffee. I had no idea the impact that membership within the states has in Washington, D.C. And I can assure you, each of you have no idea the impact that you have as members of this association and the effect that it has on the conversations that I have with members of Congress on your behalf. The only thing I would encourage you to do is we need more. We got to continue to grow that membership. I say all the time, it's about momentum. It's about momentum. The first year we struggled when I was there. Last year we came up. This year we're on track to come up. I talk to the Congress about those things. When I go over to the Congress, I tell them how good membership is and the way it's trending. But I just want you to know, of all the things it would do, there's nothing more important than the membership within the 54 states, territories, and the District of Columbia. And there's plenty of people in Washington, D.C. that can identify problems. They do it all the time. But most of the valid, reasonable, workable solution sets to those problems come from the states. Make no mistake about it. And the way those voices are heard are through this association and a strong membership. I ask you to continue to support Marshall, continue to support the leadership and bring people on board. I like what Marshall said about the way that they felt in Denver. I think Denver's going to be a great conference. I really do. We're going to have to patrol the retired group and make sure they don't wind up in some of those funny little stores they got out there because, us retirees, we're not limited by that stuff anymore. So we'll all be in a really good mood the whole time that we're out there. New Orleans was great. I don't know how many of you got to go last year. We had, I have to say, I've been going to NARGS conferences for a long time. I don't know that I've ever been to one that was any better than the one in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I gotta say, I'm optimistic about Denver. I say we're going from the swamps of Louisiana to the mountains of Colorado, and it's gonna be different. It's not gonna be the same as New Orleans. It's gonna look different. It's gonna feel different. In some cases, it's gonna smell different. But I gotta tell you, I think we're gonna have a great conference in Denver. And I think you're gonna hear from the senior leadership, from the services and from the Department of Defense, from the National Guard, and I think it's gonna be a great experience. Bring your young officers. Get them out there. I say it all the time. If you get them one time, they're hooked. They come back for the rest of their career, and they're a part of your association, and they add to what we do. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that y'all do. There's something special about going out to the state when you have a brigade in the fight. I was one of those guys, and I have to tell you, you know, all the soldiers that we have and airmen that are deployed all over the country, they're in our thoughts and prayers. And I go down, you know, we had Memorial Day. What was that last week before last? You know, I go down into the museum there at the National Guard headquarters, and on that wall in the museum, you know, it shows every soldier out of the National Guard that we've lost since 9/11. And I got to tell you, it hits home. So my thoughts and prayers are with the soldiers and their families and the children who are doing without their parents. But I just can't be grateful and thankful enough for the 48th, which is out front, fighting for our freedoms and our ability to worship as we want to. Thank you very much. I love being here. Y'all take care.
General Robinson, on behalf of the entire association, please accept this small token of our appreciation for your continued support and your continued attendance and taking time out of your schedule to be with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate it. Thanks.